Welcome to the Hall of Shores, a dwarven fortress locked in desperate struggle for survival. Nestled deep within the ground along an ocean coastline, the Hall of Shores has faced relentless attacks from goblin forces, defending their walls and their way of life. But their troubles don't end at their gates. The dwarves have been anxiously awaiting word from their mountain home, Pulleysizzled, a once great stronghold that has gone silent in recent years. No migrants have arrived, and the long-expected trade caravan has never appeared. With their numbers dwindling and their resources stretched thin, the dwarves of the Hall of Shores finally discovered a grim truth. Goblins had overrun Pulleysizzled, and the dwarven kin are missing. Faced with this horrifying reality, the dwarves launched a daring and desperate assault on the fallen capital, risking everything that they had left. This is a story of a fortress on the brink, a people fighting for their future, and a battle to reclaim what was once theirs. A story that will fill the history books and the tales that will be told in all corners of this land. Our story starts here in the early summer of year 117. The dwarves had started a new construction on one of our first few floors where the hero's hall lay. This needed a new branch to add some more pedestals to the hall. While that was going on, the humans arrived with a caravan full of goods. We sent them away with over 127,000 in value in profit. This also left our administrators wondering where the caravan from the mountain homes have been. We haven't seen them in multiple years. Our supply of steel and plumb helmets has gone stagnant, just as our population has. After the Forgotten Beast had wiped over half the population, the Hall of Shores hasn't recovered yet. After receiving no migrant waves for years or trade caravans, the administrators for the Hall of Shores fortress had grown increasingly anxious. After years of silence of the mountain home, they decided to take action. The once proud seat of their dwarven king and thriving center of dwarven culture, Pulleysizzled had been a gem of dwarven culture, filled with skilled artisans and warriors and scholars, but now the ominous silence of the fort rang throughout the lands. It was time to figure out what had caused the silence. The Hall of Glees, the militia squad, was sent to Pulleysizzled to figure out what had happened. After living through multiple sieges and monster attacks, this dwarf had seen maybe not even tens but hundreds of his kinfolk die and decay. The recruit Etor threw a tantrum, starting a fight in our taverns that was quickly ended when he was stomped out by his fellow tavern goers. His broken body was hauled down to the hospital to get fixed up before he would spend 90 days in prison. With a war being fought with multiple civilizations of these goblins, we needed to upgrade the trap hallway, ripping out some of the old serrated blades made of copper and installing new iron ones. These machines should react a little bit faster and do a bit more damage to our enemies. Down below in our caverns, we started to add walls in our second cavern. Hopefully this will soon become a almost tree farm for our dwarves, allowing us to collect wood that is not on the surface but down below, keeping our dwarves out of the sunlight as many of them do not like it and have become accustomed to living underground. We should have known the goblins were up to something, as a scout party of 5 goblin bowmen have entered our fortress. Running through the trap hallway, we cut most of them down, 4 of them dying to our traps before the final one fled for his life. The goblin was a bit too fast for our militia dwarves to catch him as he ran to our borders. After hauling goblin body after goblin body, a dwarven child named Olin started a fistfight. He punched a handful of civilians, also punched a grizzly bear at guarding our gate. The dwarven child also kicked a chicken. One of the people that he punched, an older lady named Ingish, she was a weaver. He punched her in the neck and actually tore an artery. She passed away in the hospital just after. A were-beast in the shape of a mole attacked. It had gotten to the front gate before I got any warning of it. The were-mole stood fighting our grizzly bears and also one of our scribes. The scribe ran up with a copper pick, planting it inside of the were-mole's head and leaving it to die. Thankfully, nobody was bit or scratched, therefore we didn't have to worry about expelling anybody or locking them up to see if they would transform. Midwinter of the year 117, we sent both our militia squads, the Halls of Glee and the Thorns of the Earth, to go raid Rampart Smokes, hopefully to raise and destroy it and loot a little bit. They ended up killing 3 goblins and looting some leather armor. The counterattack to the Hall of Shores arrived almost too quickly, as a goblin force approached, bringing with them a horde of beak dogs, brutish trolls, and terrifying Maneras. The dwarves, weary from years of war, knew this would be one of the largest and most brutal assaults they had ever faced. The goblins, driven by rage from the recent attacks from the dwarves, marched through the land towards the trap corridor. The twisting trap hallway claimed many goblin lives as they charged recklessly forward. Attempting to use their numbers to their advantage, stonefall traps rained boulders on their heads, while weapon traps sliced through their armor, flesh, and bone. But despite their heavy losses, the Goblin force pushed on, driven by sheer numbers and the presence of their larger, more dangerous allies in the Trolls. It was the Trolls who managed to breach the fortress. With their enormous strength, they smashed through the side door, creating a path to the main floors of the Hollow Shores. Screams of the citizens rang out, and the Dwarven warriors rushed to defend their home. The battle was fierce and desperate, with the dwarves holding the line against the onslaught. In the chaos, a dwarf spearman, hardened by countless battles, took a stand at the stairwell leading to the heart of the fortress. As 4 trolls attempted to climb the stairs, the spearman fought with unmatched fury. Driving his spear into one after another, his skill and determination were unmatched, and he single-handedly brought down all 4 trolls, preventing them from reaching the vulnerable dwarves above in the crafting halls. The Hall of Shores held firm, but the battle was far from over. Knowing the goblins would return with even more, the dwarves needed to prepare once again. Even with the military fighting as well as it did, a couple trolls, goblins, and other foes made it onto the main floors, where civilians armed with wood-cutting axes and copper pickaxes actually managed to dispatch them, with a little help from our war grizzly bears who roamed the fortress. The history books will tell you of the battles and tell you of the great heroes, but they won't tell you about the cleanup that comes after. Even with all the bodies rotting away and its meat falling from bone and then turning into dust, our dwarves are still picking stuff up out of the trap hallway, still yet to get to the corpses or the teeth or the bones that lay on the floors. This will very easily take up the entire season for us. A thief was found in the fortress and actually managed to bypass our grizzly bears guarding the gate. With him, he had kidnapped one of our dwarven children named Olin, yet the administrators had flagged Olin as a problem child. After going crazy after a few sieges in his earlier years, this child had started many fights, and our militia squad just let him go. We'll let him be the goblins' problem. With the contact being cut off from the mountain homes and the halls of glee sent out to find out what had happened, they found goblins. The goblin civilization had occupied the fort of Pulleysizzled, and our king and the population that had lived there were nowhere to be found. Knowing that the Hall of Shores was the last fortress for the last bit of the population of the Archland dwarves, a new barracks was being constructed. This time not for long-term use, but for the quick and robust training for recruits. The administrators and the council gathered together and drew up war plans. They had a year to get ready, a year to build an army, a year to forge some of the best gear that they had so far, a year to breed the most ferocious war grizzly bears that this world has ever seen. So the new recruits got busy. They trained in the hallways of the new barracks, testing out their iron shields, breastplates, and weapons. The fortress was stocked with plenty of gear for them to pull from, so they had their choice on which weapons they preferred to use. The cave dragon that we stole from the goblins was assigned to the Halls of Glee commander Litast. Litast would lead the attack against the goblin foes who occupied Pulleysizzled. While many dwarves were training for war, giant agitated dingoes attacked. These giant creatures filled the stone corridors of the trap hallway. A couple of them were actually cut down by our traps. The few that were left, we sent the dwarves and the militia squads out to attack them. We ended up losing 2 civilians along with 2 members of the militia squads in this fight. One of the giant dingoes picking up one of our swords dwarf and shaking her like a toy. All 4 dwarves were buried downstairs in the tombs, and the dingoes were tossed into the atomizer to be destroyed. An army of 50 dwarves geared up within the Hall of Shores, their faces set with grim determination. Their commander, Litast, stood with her war dragon, reminding them of Pulleysizzled. Their once glorious mountain home had fallen. The goblins had not only occupied the fortress, but had slaughtered every dwarf inside. The halls that had once echoed with laughter, song, and the ring of hammers were now silent, defiled by an enemy. The dwarves of the Hall of Shores, few in number, were now the last of their kind. Their population had dwindled over years of war, but this final blow had kindled a fire of vengeance within their heart. They knew that to reclaim their old home was a dream long lost, but they could not let the fortress rest in the hands of their ancestral foes. The decision was made. 50 warriors, all that remained that could bear arms, would march to Pulleysizzled. They would raze it to the ground, ensuring that if it could not belong to the dwarves, it would belong to no one. The journey would be perilous, and many knew that they may not return. But whether they made it back or fell in battle, they would take as many goblins with them as they could. The dwarves would march out, with their bears and lone dragon, their axes and hammers gleaming in the warm light. The weight of their ancestors' memory drove them forward. This was not just a battle, it was the last stand of a proud people, determined to leave their mark on a world that had long forgotten them. The Archland dwarves who had built the Hall of Shores will write their name in history with iron and blood. The silence in the fortress was unnerving, where once the sound of hammer on anvil, pick on stone, and the laughter in the halls filled the air, there was now only stillness. Dust settled slowly for half-finished projects, abandoned tools, and cold, empty forges. The great dining hall, once echoing with the feasts and songs, stood barren, as its long tables lined with untouched mugs of ale and cold meals never eaten had rotted. The administrators who were left behind and the children now knew what it was like to be in a tomb like the hundreds of their kinfolk down below in the caverns. The flames and the torches had been burning out, leaving the halls in a dim twilight. They're barely illuminated by the faint glow of the magma forges far below in the caverns. No one knew if the squads would return, but in silence there was promise. Etched into every stone, every hall, and every weapon left behind, they would either return to reclaim the halls, or they would not return at all. Until then, the fortress would wait, silent as a grave, holding its breath in the fate for the last of its dwarves. And yet that was a fate that would never come. 20 years. The Hall of Shores stood 20 years. With the last of its brave population running off the Pulleysizzled to fight the goblins who had occupied their mountain home. These dwarves will never be forgotten, as their fortress still stands, every engraving, book, and statue remembering their history. The dwarves never returned. Not one out of the 50 ever returned to the fortress for a few more seasons. As far as the Hall of Shores and the Archland dwarves knows, they are still there, fighting the good fight. I really do appreciate you guys coming to check out this video. It really means the world to me that you guys have joined me on this journey through the Hall of Shores and the Archland Dwarves. It's been a great story. I've had a ton of fun making these videos and going along on this adventure. 20 years is a long time in a dwarf fortress. There's very few fortresses that end up making it this far, let alone having all the great stories that we've had. I just want you to know that more stories like this are soon to be published, but for a second I'm going to be working on the 10-year video and the 20-year total playlist for this. So if you want to watch the entire story of the Archland Dwarves, you're going to be able to find it on my channel here very, very soon. I do want to say thank you very much to the over 1,500 of you guys that have subscribed to this channel. If you want to stay and watch more content, it's going to be here. So subscribing is the #1 way to see that. Any comments and likes are greatly appreciated. I try to look through them every day. I really love some of you guys' ideas and a lot of your comments and nice words. It's great. It means the world to me. Also, I don't expect any of you guys to go actually click on this, but there is a spread shop down below. I'm sure you guys have seen it if you're watching the video or whatever. There are a few designs. There's a Dwarf Fortress one that I just made, which I think is pretty cool, and the rest of them are just concert game stuff. So if you wanted to support me in that way, that's there for you. You can find the link tree to all of this stuff down below. There's also a Discord and my TikTok and such. So you're going to be seeing a couple more videos popping up right here along with the subscribe thing. Feel free to click that if you'd like, and I'll see you guys in the next video. Stay tuned for the other stuff coming out. Peace.